don't think of it as like, this is the place I need to be for the rest of my life, it's kind of some outdated thinking that is part of our success conditioning, which I think is less and less the case now, especially since 2020. But some of the generational things that we've inherited from like Depression era ancestors is that need for stability above all else. And the era of going to work for a company until you retired, collecting a pension, and feeling like that's kind of the American dream is to have all that stability. And we just don't really have that anymore.
In a corporate world where all employees have great leaders with no egos that create fun cultures where people can do their best work, the employees and companies thrive while doing great things for the customers, themselves, and each other.
Well, we know that rarely happens. I'm Jeff Palacio. I have been a leader for over 40 years for every t-shirt size company, from small 16 employees to extra large over 1 million. Please join me while I interview outstanding leaders that will share stories of great leadership and not so great. It will help you become a better leader while poking fun at all the crazy shit that happens in corporate America.
Today, Jeff welcomes back Maki Moussavi, executive coach, speaker, author of The High Achiever's Guide, and the first full-length episode returning guest on the Corporate Couch. In her first conversation with Jeff, Maki talked about success conditioning and how high achievers often chase validation, titles, and achievement without stopping to ask what it's costing them. This time, Jeff and Maki take that conversation deeper, looking at how individual conditioning shapes broken systems, why we learn to tolerate and enable things at work, and the powerful question Maki believes everyone should ask: what are you tolerating?
Maki, welcome back to the Corporate Couch today.
Thanks for having me back, Jeff. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm very excited. You're the first guest that is taking a second episode that's the full-length episode. So I have had guests come back on doing a special edition, but I'm trying something new here. You and I had coffee probably about 6 weeks ago, and I told you that I'd like to have you back on, and we'll expand on our first conversation. And so here we are. So congratulations for this well-esteemed honor. When I win an Emmy for Best Podcast, I'm going to make sure I reference you. So
perfect.
Yeah.
Works for me.
Yeah.
I'm ready for it.
Yeah. So, I mean, the traditional episode that, your career journey, leadership advice, things you went through, but one of our conversation in that episode was, why we chase success and success conditioning and things like that. But, since we spoke, and I think you were around episode 50 and now I'm on 215, what has changed for you in terms of that first conversation? Have your thoughts stayed the same, or have they evolved to a certain point?
The foundation of the thoughts are the same, right? That doesn't change. I feel like that's my philosophical approach to looking at the things that get in the way of professionals, type A's, just human beings, right? It's a universal experience. But I would say that if there's anything that's shifted a bit, it's probably just a deepening of the observation of the ways in which that personal success conditioning is playing out in our more collective experience at a much higher level, in ways that we probably don't really think about or reflect on very often. We're certainly not encouraged to do that reflection for a lot of reasons. And I just feel, as I look around and see the state of things, I'm able to connect more and more dots between the way that we're set up to pursue success as individuals and the way that that plays out at the societal level in ways that we're seeing now, even if it's not super obvious at first.
For those that missed our first episode together, if you had to tell somebody in 30 seconds to a minute, what is success conditioning?
My personal journey was one where I had kind of built my career to a certain level that was everything I thought I wanted up to that point, until I started to see that there were some things really fundamentally missing for me. I wasn't fulfilled. I felt like I was always seeking, that I could never quite find the payoff for the effort that I was putting into things in an internal personal way versus, of course I was benefiting in a material way in terms of pay and promotion and things of that nature. And when I started to do the deeper self-reflection around why that might be, I started to see these patterns around not only the way that I was operating professionally, but the way that a lot of people around me were operating professionally in my workplace, that suggested we have similar challenges, even if we don't have exactly the same backgrounds and we don't come to where we are in the same ways. And so that is what I refer to as success conditioning, kind of the way that we are taught, especially if you're a type A, there's a way to get from point A to point B. You should be goal oriented, work backwards from goals, orient yourself around tasks you need to finish in order to get to that goal. A lot of us will experience getting to a goal and feeling like a very temporary or short-lived payoff to that before we start planning for the next thing. Success conditioning really sets us up to be in this kind of endless loop of feeling like we have to prove our value, seeking the payoff that we're promised in a kind of magical thinking way. Like, hey, if you just go do all these things, you're going to be happy, you're going to be successful, like life's going to be great. The suggestions that there is a way to get to that magical place of happiness is often through the pursuit of your professional endeavors in this very specific way. But that teaches you to do some people pleasing, right? Like in order to be successful, you sort of got to keep your mouth shut sometimes. You got to play the game. You do have to prove your value in terms of, are you worthy of this promotion? And then when you get the promotion, then you feel like you have to prove that they made the right decision in putting you there. So, there's these like cycles and patterns of behavior and thinking that successful people get stuck in without recognizing that the need for validation, the need to feel valuable, the need to prove oneself, all of those things become so ingrained and really interfere with our ability to feel good as humans outside of the professional realm. And that's my whole purpose in working with my clients, is to deprogram from that, because it's the thing that it'll get you to a certain level of success, but it's not going to get you to the next level. And often even the level of success you can get to with that feels like it's missing something very significant.
We touched on it on our first conversation, first episode we did together. But for me, I think I always had a balance in terms of, I was a hard worker with strong work ethic, goal oriented, but I knew like my job wasn't my main source of satisfaction. I was a, father, spouse, whatever my other roles in life were more important to me, but I still had the drive to do great things, to build a great culture. And when COVID hit and I got reduction in forced or rift, I guess, I had a really hard time with a lot of different things. One, I still wanted to work inside a company, which is crazy because I went through some crazy times at various different companies, but I really thought my professional gift was to, build great cultures where people have fun, do their best work, achieve great things together and grow, personally and professionally. But when I finally decided to go out on my own, as well as launch this podcast, I really, really had a hard time, after the, I'll say the grind of doing all those things inside companies where, you make a lot of money for the company and other people maybe, but, you maybe didn't get rewarded and your life is mainly structured. You have meetings and all this. And it's really a sense of, I know you talk about in your book as well as our last conversation, but it's like you have to debrief and detox or whatever it is, because we're conditioned to not be robots, but it's sometimes toxic. I love your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. I mean, I often reflect on the time immediately following when I made the decision to take the leap and leave my corporate job, and thinking I was being really pie in the sky and thinking this is going to be the best summer ever, because I left at the beginning of June and I thought I'm going to have this chill, relaxing summer with my kids. It's going to be great. I'm going to be in this totally different place. And just as you're saying, it wasn't true. I mean, I was actually kind of a wreck that summer as I was decompressing and unwinding from, 14 years of being in an environment like that, where, even if you are someone, like you said, who understands like work is not your entire purpose and there's other things in life that you have going for you that are really the priority, you do kind of become very accustomed to operating within a certain framework. And for a lot of people in the, especially corporate world, it's your calendar dictates, who you see and where you spend time and how your days are structured. And the things that you're doing, someone's usually asking you to do these tasks and get to these things. You are just so used to having things kind of laid out for you. And even though it sounds ideal to be able to make those choices for yourself, often what people find when they first make that transition is, I don't know how to do any of that, right? Like, I don't like, how do I spend my time? And it's almost overwhelming because you have so many options that prioritizing, you kind of have to relearn the muscle of prioritizing for yourself rather than letting like a company's priorities dictate how you spend your time.
Yeah.
And that framework that you get used to operating within, when it doesn't exist anymore, there is that necessary processing of what it provided, but maybe what it didn't provide, maybe where it was taking from you. And then kind of learning the skills sometimes for the first time, because a lot of us go from graduating from school to working for someone else. And not everyone even has the journey of potentially leaving to do something that isn't working for someone else. And that is a big transition. I think that we overhype and over glamorize the life of an entrepreneur. It's all over the place. Like, go be your own boss and do your own thing. And there's a bunch of bullshit around, like, go make 7 figures, and do all this stuff. And that's just not real life. Absolutely there are people who do that, but it's not the norm, right? Yeah. There's an exception there to the people that in some ways are potentially profiting from telling you that story because they want you to hire them to help you get to the same place, or they've got a product or something that they want to sell you. And I'm not saying that that's bad, but there's a little bit of glamorization. And I think one of my biggest learning points was I really understood the success conditioning that came with working in a corporate environment. And I didn't really understand that there's an equal amount of success conditioning around being an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And that's something that I had to really observe and pay attention to in order to stay very grounded in where I wanted to make sure I was kind of captaining my own ship instead of letting someone else dictate to me, well, this is how you become successful.
Yeah. And I think for me and, people I've spoke to on the podcast, it's just, when you have a W-2 job, it's, the salary is great. The bonuses are great. The perks are great. You have a built-in system. And I think, everybody, it's like a house renovation or building a new house or whatever you want to, some kind of project where it always takes more time and it costs more money than the original estimate. So if you think you're going to go out of the gate, and some people do, right? But it's a process and it's showing up. And, I think one of the challenges people have, and I tell job seekers this all the time, when you get ripped from a job, it's terrible. It's, going to find another job in a W-2 environment is hard. It's the process is inhumane. Most companies treat you, not well. But I always say, like, if you're up 16 hours a day, you cannot work on getting a job for 16 hours. Like, if nobody has a problem golfing on a Friday afternoon with a client or with friends when they have a job, but for some reason, if you love golfing, you're like, I can't go golfing Friday afternoon with my friends because I don't have a job. That, it's going to cost X amount of money. I'm going to be gone for 5.5 hours. And, and I tell people, go do that because you can't look for a job the whole time, and you need to take care of yourself and do things that bring you joy. But I didn't even take my own advice when I was looking and trying to build my business. Like, sometimes I'm like, I don't want to even clean my office because I'm like, oh, I'm not working on getting revenue in the Palazzo and Partner door. But yeah.
Yeah, I think this conversation about RIFs is important. I think to be context sensitive, Oracle just did a big round of layoffs. They bought my former company. I worked for Cerner for many years. And, I think that there's two things in that, right? I think it is a terrible rug to have pulled out from under you that just takes all of your stability away, in one fell swoop, which is absolutely terrible. So if I had anything to say about that, I would say, prioritize taking care of what you need to take care of so that you can be okay and have your needs met, for sure. But one thing that I encourage people to do, because I do often work with clients who are looking for their next opportunity, they may or may not be working at the time that we work together, is to take that time to not just allow the fear to take over, right? Because one tendency that a lot of type A people have is to be very catastrophic in their thinking. So If you thought that you were going to be at this company until you retired and then that doesn't happen, the fast forwarding of your brain to the ultimate worst scenario where you go from having a house and a car to living under a bridge it's very quick, right? People they go straight to the catastrophe. When the reality is in a lot of situations that, you're being offered some kind of a severance, you may have a 401k. There are other things that are going to act as safety nets for you potentially. So it's important to reality check yourself when you feel yourself spiraling into the fear. The second is, whatever you do next, don't think of it as like, this is the place I need to be for the rest of my life, it's kind of some outdated thinking that is part of our success conditioning, which I think is less and less the case now, especially since 2020. But some of the generational things that we've inherited from like Depression era ancestors is that need for stability above all else. And the era of going to work for a company until you retired, collecting a pension and feeling like that's kind of the American dream is to have all that stability. And we just don't really have that anymore. And in some ways, what it does is it allows people to have more than one career path in their lives, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But that old outdated thinking can make you think in terms of permanence rather than in terms of what's temporary. And sometimes if you can alleviate the pressure to find exactly the right opportunity and to let yourself take the opportunity that makes sense in the moment and then continue to look if you have to is really important. So that's where I think people get into some analysis paralysis. Like, is this the right decision? Should I be doing this? Sometimes the thing that's in front of you, if it's meeting a specific need, it's okay to go ahead and take it, even if it's not ideal, so that you can take the time to continue to figure out what is a better fit. The second piece is it's important to take that time to consider, why is this happening? Is this a role that I've been in that I've wanted to leave for some time, that made me unhappy in a lot of ways, that I wasn't willing to make the choice to leave because of all the uncertainty that came with it, and now the decision's been made. And, one thing that I think I talked about in our first episode that I talk about all the time is it's so much easier if when a change needs to take place, that you voluntarily take the steps to make the change. Because if you don't, the universe will punch you in the throat and it will take you out and make you make the change some other way. And it's going to happen whether you choose it or you don't choose it. And so if you choose it, you have more agency over the way it goes versus if you wait for the bad thing to happen before you make a move, because then you're in crisis mode, right? No. So if that happens to you, do what you have to do, but also take the time to be really reflective on your career and honest with yourself about, was it something that I should have volunteered to leave? And if so, what was it about the experience that wasn't working, so that as you look for your next opportunity, you can be super clear about what you're looking for so that you don't just go back in and have the same experience again.
Yeah. I was going to exactly what you just mentioned. I went through 9 involuntary transitions. So if I went to a company or a division of a company, some shit would happen to it, or they move, they go out of business, they do a major riff. And, I'm a believer in, like you said, God, the universe puts you where you need to be. So, a couple of those jobs I wasn't happy at. So it moved, I was moved on. And, I think you have to look at it that way and really, and the last time when I now went out on my own, I could not get a job. So I could either, do the Einstein thing of, the insanity definition of keep doing the same things and expect different results, or I could do something else. So, because me not getting another W-2 job basically said, okay, Jeff, some higher powers telling me you got to do something else. It took you 7 tries, but here we go. So, and talk about, your former company, Cerner, now Oracle. People, they laid off 30,000 people in an email, not even a meeting, no heads up, and that was their last day. So okay, maybe some of those people weren't good performers, but 80% were, right? At least, 24, 28,000, whatever it is. They were contributing. They're in this success wheel, conditioning, and then they get treated like that. So it makes it even worse. In my opinion, to work for a company like that. And a lot of the ex-Cerner people were impacted the most because it was their healthcare division that, was not doing well.
Right, exactly. And I think that's one of the things that that, as you become more and more adept at doing the self-reflection around what do you want from a potential opportunity, or how is your current environment supporting you or not supporting you? One of the things that is very difficult is, I think we've even seen an acceleration of this, is the way that everything right now is basically serving somebody's greedy purposes, right? These corporations are making more and more money. They're making big speculations. I've heard some speculation that Oracle did this because they had committed a crap ton of money to building some AI data centers, and they needed to cut costs somewhere in order to accommodate that. And that shiny object thinking that corporations are really subject to, because they're always chasing a profit margin, and they're in service to the board and the stock market and all of the things that are so out of balance. It really turns people into cogs in a wheel, maybe even more so now than ever before. And that is one of the pieces that I've been really reflecting on as I think about success conditioning, is the ways in which I always ask, when I see something that's not just, in my opinion, I ask, who's profiting from this?
Right.
Because, what happens is, those of us who want to be purposeful and to contribute and to do a good job at our work, that's the thing about being a type A, right? Most of us get a really big charge from feeling like we're making a difference, we're getting stuff done, we're growing something, we're building something, we're contributing to something in some meaningful way. And because we're so driven and can put our heads down and we can grind, in service to that, while we're doing it for our own reasons, the people that we're doing it for are profiting from the fact that we do that, right? And so there is no checks and balances around, hey, maybe you're working too hard. Maybe you're going to have a heart attack. Maybe you need to take a step back. There's none of that. And I can't tell you how many people I've met or have known personally who have died because of the stress or the secondary effects of stress, whether by suicide or catastrophic illness or other things, because they're pouring their heart and soul into this thing because they personally want the validation that they have value. But the thing that they're doing it for, the entity that they're doing it for, is like a vampire. It will take every single bit of energy that you want to give it. And then at the end of the day, go, you know what? Too fucking bad. Here's your email. You're out of here. We got to pay for some bigger stuff that we committed to. You're expendable. And the thing that I see and that I think is happening, and I'm so excited to see it, because I've always had this sort of like deeper philosophical pull towards we have to have more justice in the world for people, right? Like, this is just a mess. We're on a really bad path. But for people to be aware of that, to look around and think like, why am I doing this to myself? Is this really serving me? If it's not, what am I compromising on that I don't want to compromise on? Where am I saying yes to things I don't want to say yes to? Where am I sacrificing things around my health, my life, my family that I'd rather not, but that I feel compelled to do because of that, the cyclical nature of everything we've talked about around the conditioning. Yeah. And I understand that's terrifying, because if you start to uncover those answers, then you feel compelled to make a change. Once you see it, you can't unsee it, and now you're on the path. And the thought of making that change can be really scary because of the stability and the uncertainty and all the things that we've been talking about. But we have reached this kind of fever pitch, I think, in capitalistic systems where inflation is kind of endless and profit chasing is sort of insatiable. And there isn't any end in sight unless those of us as individuals look at our own microcosm and decide, I will or won't participate in this. And if I decide I don't want to, what does that mean? And be okay with the uncomfortable nature of being in that space. You don't have to have the answer yet, but asking the question is powerful.
I agree. And to talk about the profit, like 3 weeks before that Oracle termination of 30,000 people, they had their best growth, organic growth, in 15 years. That was their best quarter. It was like some crazy $6 billion in profit. I mean, and so, if you're one of those 30,000 and, they applauded 3 weeks prior, all this success and earnings and things like that, it's crazy. So, Maki, in your opinion, what does success conditioning reward versus punish?
Wow, that's a great question. Well, I think first and foremost, success conditioning has the false premise of the reward around the things that we're talking about, right? The roles, the responsibility, the salary, the bonus, the benefits that you get that are big enough and tangible enough that the littler things, you squash them if you have to. So for instance, let's say you have an opinion that something that's happening or a decision that's being made is short-sighted, and you want to express that opinion. Depending on the environment you're in, there could be real punishment for trying to bring that authentic point forward, right? If you're not just towing the line or saying what the leader wants to hear, you're taking a risk. And again, because type A's do kind of have this catastrophic thinking tendency, usually what happens inside someone's brain is, if I say this, I won't be considered for future promotion. I may get fired. You do all these very quick calculations of the potential consequences, and then you decide to eat your words. And you just say, that's fine. I'm just going to go along to get along. It doesn't matter what I think. They're going to make the decision anyway. And so one of the most damaging things I see is that learned enabling behavior that teaches us to swallow our words instead of speak them. And I think that is a huge source of the stress that people in most work environments feel, is that it's not okay to say what you want to say it the way that you want to say it, that you can't make mistakes, you can't misspeak if it's not politically expedient. There's a lot of potential consequences for that. And so then you also end up on top of having this organization of very smart people who are willing to grind, an organization full of people who have been taught to fear challenging the system. And so then what happens? Well, you just continue on these trajectories where companies continue to make decisions, may be able to post big profits and tell you you're a part of that, and then turn around and tell you to leave because thanks, but we don't need you. Yeah. We've got other plans. And so I think that those biggest pieces are withholding your voice and the learned enabling behaviors that often come with those environments. And the other piece of that enabling is, and I still see this all the time, and it's extremely frustrating for the people who are in these situations, is the tolerance for mediocre performance inside of big organizations, right?
Right.
Or tolerance for toxic personalities, where the person who is either not performing or the person who is a toxic asshole, those people, everyone else is expected to work around them, right? There isn't a direct challenge to the person. They just say, well, we've tried and it hasn't worked. And so this is how they are. And so the rest of us just have to either walk on eggshells or take up the slack for this person who's not performing, instead of being able to look at someone and saying, you know what, you're a toxic personality. We've had this conversation multiple times. You're not a good fit for the culture of this team. You need to go.
Right.
Or you're a mediocre performer. We've tried to, coach you up to where you need to be. It's an endless process where you never get to where you need to be, and therefore we're not going to work around you and you need to go. These decisions to allow people to exit or to ask them to exit so that the other people in your organization who are good get to have a more positive working environment is not something that I will ever understand. I do not understand this culture of tolerating not good things from people at the expense of the good people that are in your organization.
Yeah.
So I feel that's a big punishment of these systems in terms of success conditioning.
Are you drowning in boring corporate communications? Palacio and Partners is here to rescue you. We transform internal podcasts from snooze fest to must-listen content that actually connects your team and strengthens your culture. Imagine podcast episodes that make your employees laugh while staying informed. Our founder, Jeff Palacio, doesn't just create podcasts. He creates conversations that break through the noise. Whether you're a growing startup or a massive corporation, we turn your company's story into audio gold. Leadership becomes human. Remote teams feel connected. Your message cuts through the clutter. Palacio and Partners, where corporate communications gets a fun makeover. Let's make your podcast work harder than your email inbox ever could. Jeff is happy to share his insights on podcasting with you. You can contact him via LinkedIn or schedule a Zoom call via the link in the episode description.
When I look at it, I see two different problems in that scenario you just mentioned. One is you get people that are just taking this role for the next career ladder climb, and they know, like, I just need to do this 18 months and that's going to get me to my next stop. So I'm doing things to make myself look good to get there. I think that's one. And I think it's lack of leadership training. It's easier it's hard to give somebody that has a history of, getting, decent, like let's say average to maybe above average performance reviews, because it's easier to give somebody that because they're not going to question you. You're not going to have a hard conversation. I remember, giving the grading system that, a lot of performance appraisal reviews are, 1, you walk on water; 2, you've done, very good work; 3 is average, and so on, 4 and 5. But, everybody, 3 is doing your job. It's not bad, but everybody thinks that's a C. So this person I took over, inherited, I gave him a average rating because he was too unfocused. He had too many responsibilities. He didn't do enough. And that he went ballistic on me, and I asked his prior supervisor, and he literally told me that he gave him a higher rating so he wouldn't have to put up with, the tough conversation. So
exactly.
Yeah.
I know it happens all the time. I had a situation in my last role when I was still at Cerner where I wrote about it in my book, but I took that role and I was excited. It was, a leadership role that I had wanted. And I was running into people I knew in the hallways and they were kind of giving me this feedback of like, oh man, that's the team you took over. Good luck, and getting a lot of feedback from people that there were a couple people on that team who were super problematic and that had never been dealt with. And so, I kind of walked right into that situation where sure enough, there were 2 people who very toxic personalities in different ways, and had been written up multiple times and had really egregious behaviors that had been overlooked because they had a champion who was sort of protecting them. And I went to bat in order to address that issue, but it was such an uphill climb to get people to listen. But at the end of the day, I said, we can't have this is ruining everyone else's work experience and it's not good for our clients. We can't tolerate this. But unfortunately, that's more rare than it is, than it is common.
Talk about, you have thoughts in terms of, how does the career ambition really reinforce, this broken system really, in personal or, professional success, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think the thing that's missing is that career ambition has been very defined for us in a super material and tangible way where it's about, again, like what's the status that you're achieving? You mentioned people who want to stay in a role for 18 months because ultimately, maybe they're gunning for like a vice president position or something beyond that. And the career ambition is kind of laid out for us in these very tangible ways, like get more responsibility. So have more people reporting to you, have a higher title, make more money, be at the decision-making table, right? It's just these very like defined things. And what career ambition leaves out in our success paradigm is like, why do you care? Like, right. What about this is about you? Like, which part of this is about something that feels purposeful or meaningful to you? It's super common when I'm talking with people for the first time for them to say, I've been overlooked for this promotion and I really want to work with someone to help me get to that level. And I never just say, oh, that sounds great. Let's do it.
Right.
My question is always like, well, why do you want that?
Right.
Right. Because it's often in the context of I'm in this role now and it's driving me crazy and I'm super stressed out and I'm working too many hours. And it's like, do you think that's going to change when you get a promotion? Like, how do we stop leaving who we are as human beings out of the equation when it comes to work? We've got to have this holistic view. And career ambition, as it's defined from the outside, isn't about any of that, right? It's just about checking the boxes and doing the obvious things that get rewarded. It's not about how does it make you feel? Do you care? Is this what you want? What is this taking from you that you don't want to give up, right? This idea that like maybe you have kids and you're in a super demanding role. And so making time for your family isn't really, is really hard to do. And, you could certainly try hard and rock the boat to make it happen. But also then you have that push-pull of like, well, am I meeting their expectations? I can't be in this role and not do that. And so then what are you doing? Are you choosing your job over your family? Like these are the types of things that are just left out of that holistic consideration at great personal cost to us. It serves the intent of the employer, but not you as a human being. And that's the piece that we need to be really mindful about because no one else cares. To your point and to our point about this whole, like, you get riffed and that's the end of it. You're the person who has to care the most about you, because it isn't going to be someone else.
Yeah, totally. I mean, yeah. And I think part of it is, you need to reflect occasionally on where you're at and take inventory versus the grind. And, life gets in the way and things like that. So, for people that have, chosen to have kids and the kids are young and you're trying to figure out, your own, becoming a parent and, working, raising a healthy adult human being in the future is a big responsibility. So we talked about some success behaviors, but what's the one you really call is the biggest bullshit success behavior in your mind?
I would say the biggest bullshit success behavior that is so linked to so many other things is validation seeking. And I say that as someone who was very stuck in the cycle of seeking the validation of others. It's such a common thing. Even if you're not necessarily thinking about it, it may be something that you do. A lot of us have childhood experiences and other things that have happened to us it's set us up for that. I'm always really transparent about the fact that I had a pretty difficult upbringing with not good parents in terms of stability, who were traumatized themselves and who really passed that on to us. And what validation seeking did for me when I was a kid was help me get what I needed from other adults that I couldn't get from my parents, right? So I became a really good student. I let performance be the thing that I led with so that I would get the feedback that I was seeking, that I really needed in order to, like, be okay as a child growing up, right? So it was a coping mechanism and it worked, thankfully, right? Because I don't know what I would have done if it hadn't worked. And I needed that at the time. But the challenge is that for those of us who have those experiences where maybe you had a difficult parent who just never showed up for you the way they needed to, and you didn't get the feedback that you wanted, or you had an early work experience that really shook the foundation of your self-worth, whatever those things are, you find coping mechanisms to handle them in the moment, and they serve you in that way, but they don't serve you forever. And that's where that self-reflection becomes so critically important, to look at this thing that used to work for me and that I needed at the time, I've internalized it, is no longer serving my highest good, and it needs to change. And that was the assessment that I had to make for myself, which was where I was constantly, in my work environment, I was getting rewarded for all those behaviors, right? I was getting promoted steadily. I was getting raises steadily. I was getting new assignments steadily. Like, I was getting all of those things. And it wasn't until I recognized it doesn't matter what I get. It's like there's a void inside of me that can't be filled. That's a me problem, right? Yeah. No work environment's perfect, but at the end of the day, we have to own our own bullshit. And that was a part of mine was you're always seeking the outside approval for the things that you're doing, and you're getting it, but it's not changing anything for you because this is an internal issue that must be dealt with.
Right.
And it wasn't until I broke free of, like, I'm not doing that anymore. You can like me, not like me. You can not like what I say. I'm going to say it anyway. But really working on embodying that to get to the point where it wasn't the driver anymore was just critical to being on a completely different path.
Yeah. And I was self-motivated. I didn't really need the recognition, but, there was one year I had gone to the President's Club the year prior, and I was in a marketing role. And, so it wasn't a sales-based President's Club. You had to be chosen. And so I went. It was fantastic. And then the next year, I had an even better year. I mean, I did so many great, myself and my team, mainly my team, did great things. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to go to President's Club. Well, I didn't go. And I was decimated. It was like, oh, well, what, I mean, and in hindsight, I'm like, oh yeah, I had a good boss. I really liked him. And, he said, look, you had a great year, but I had to send somebody else. I didn't have to, but I wanted to. And I understood that.
Yeah. And I think it's important what you just said, because I do think that there are ways in which that tendency kind of gets hidden from us as individuals. I was always super self-motivated and really competent and a fast learner, and you could give me things that I'd never done before and I was going to figure it out. Right. Like, that was the way I was wired.
Right.
And confident in my execution. And the thing is that a lot of high achieving, successful people, because they are confident and they're very similar, they're self-motivated and they do the things and they get the results, don't recognize that there are these underlying behaviors that are more hidden, that you may not see until you have an event like the one that you were just talking about, or when you're recognized, it's like, I thought I wanted that, but honestly, like it just still doesn't do anything for me. Now I just need to set the next goal, and maybe the next time I get a result that I want, it'll feel different. And you just kind of end up in this endless pursuit. But because so many very successful, highly competent, very intelligent people are so good at what they do and doing it the way they do it, they don't necessarily recognize that some of these conditioned behaviors are playing a role underneath the surface.
So, we talk about the system, right? Is the actual corporate system broken, or is it really just designed that way to keep us working and grinding and profiting? The senior executives and the stockholders and things like that. What's your thoughts there, Maki?
Yeah, I think it can be both. I think it's working as designed from the perspective of the company or the organization, until it isn't, right? Until you notice that you have cultural issues, or that maybe your attrition rates are high because you're doing something that's not retaining your talent. But I also think the system's broken for so many reasons. I've had the privilege of working with people across many different industries, and you know what? They're not different from each other, right? They all share some characteristics in common that are just the function of working in a system that puts profit above everything else. And I'll give you an example of this because it's super relevant. When I've worked with people who are commission-based earners, who are really, really good at producing whatever it is that they're doing it for, industry-wise, doesn't really matter. They're good at hitting their numbers. They get recognized for it, just like you were saying, being part of the President's Club and things of that nature. But what happens is, it's not unusual at all for really good producers to get to the point where what they're expected to produce is no longer reasonable.
Right.
Right? Because the metric goes up no matter what, right? And without consideration for what can the market actually bear, and have we reached a bit of a saturation point? And because this person is so good at their job, maybe this is not a 10x last year or a 2x last year. It's something much more modest. Maybe you even just hold steady. Right. And I have seen so many people leave jobs who were so good at what they were doing because what they were being expected to continue to do was not sustainable.
Right.
And that to me is a symptom of the brokenness, where we think that there's this endless expansion that is supposed to be the norm in our organizations and companies. Like, unless you're growing, you're broken. That's somehow your stockholders should be sad or disappointed, or that's, somehow you're supposed to continue to grow at some sort of exponential clip, which is not sustainable, right? And so what happens is the people that are really good at that end up leaving because they're like, well, I just can't. Like, what it took for me to do what I did last year was a lot. And now they want me to do even more. And right. It just doesn't feel reasonable. And there isn't any way to give that feedback to a corporate machinery that doesn't care, right? It's just, you just need to do better. You just need to do more. Because you did this much last year, you can do more this year. It's not based on anything except for some material numeric number, right? And that's where I think the brokenness of the system, it shows up in so many ways, but that's an example. And just the way that we completely disregard the sustainability of anything, right? So like AI is a great example. There's all these companies that want to capitalize on AI. It's the next shiny object. This is where we're going. Well, AI taxes the shit out of the Earth's ecosystems, right? It requires a lot of water. It requires a lot of land. People don't want these things next to them.
Right.
These companies don't care because they think they're going to profit, right? So the damage to the Earth, fast fashion is the same way. Endless use of plastics is the same way. Everything's about the money and nothing's about the environment. Nothing's about the people. We can't live like that. Again, we've reached a tipping point. There's too many people on the earth. There's too many companies. There's too many industries. What I think looks like success now is probably looks more like contraction than expansion. Right. Pull back to more of what people need, go back to sustainability, go back to caring about the environment, put people at the center of what you do. And I know there are some companies who are starting to do that. And I do think more than previously, we're starting to see some companies that make decisions in ways that align with those things. And it's going to take a lot more momentum to get more things moving in the right direction. So I think, unfortunately, a lot of organizations are more broken than not. But I also think that human beings are at the point where they're demanding more than they've demanded before. And so I take that as a very positive sign.
Yeah. That's an interesting take in terms of companies. And I think COVID showed how companies need to change, and some of them are, most are just staying the same or worse, believe it or not. How do individuals create the change and start maybe these small rebellion ideas to make small differences that, mean something and gives them hope, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that we're talking this week because there was just that really big warehouse fire. I think there's been a few, but where the disgruntled employee basically went in and lit this entire warehouse on fire because he was like, well, you don't pay me what I need to live, so see ya, and just like blew this place up.
Right.
And right, we don't want that. We don't want destruction and people reaching their absolute limit to be the way that we make change, because it doesn't work. First of all, it's too destructive and it affects everybody else who worked and collected a paycheck from that place. So I think what's important is don't let yourself be a simmering pot. First of all, if you feel like you're always up to here with whatever's happening in your environment, it's time to pause and ask yourself, what is the challenge? What's going on right now that makes you feel like one more thing and you're going to blow, right? And I'm not suggesting that people who are listening to this are going to go set a warehouse on fire, but even just at the everyday level, just, if you're always simmering and one more thing is just going to send you over the edge, that is such a clear sign that you need to reflect on what's making you feel that way. And it's probably more than one thing, but there may be one predominant thing that's making you feel that way. And so maybe it's, as we talked about earlier, always withholding your voice or tolerating like a really terrible person that you have to work with every day. Make these smaller decisions every day about how you're just not going to do what you always do, how you're going to approach it differently. You're going to say something to someone, whether it's to the person themselves or to your manager. You're going to set a boundary that you are willing to enforce, that if you are desperately unhappy, you won't talk yourself into staying, but instead use the time where you're still gainfully employed to start getting super clear about what you would prefer to experience and start looking for that opportunity.
Yeah.
None of us is stuck. Everything is choice.
Right.
So to the extent that you can take that ownership, anytime you tell yourself, I don't have a choice, I'm stuck here, that's not going to cut it, because then you won't make any moves. You don't acknowledge the power that you have, which is always to not put up with the situation. And that doesn't mean you have to burn everything down all at once. You can say, all right, well, I'm super clear that this is not a sustainable thing. And if I'm still here in 6 months, I'm probably going to lose it. So let me start looking at what do I need to be doing and looking for, and what moves can I be making to get myself into a better position. And then if you are in an environment where you'd really like to stay and there's some things that can change, be transparent about that. Have the conversation with the right people. Maybe it's a conversation with a manager. Maybe it's a conversation with someone who works for you. But start raising your expectations instead of being resigned to how it is now.
Yeah.
And as you raise your expectations, take those aligned actions to try to make it better. And if everybody was doing this in these incremental ways, you build muscle memory around taking those actions. You get stronger. It may feel very hard at first. It becomes second nature eventually. And you stop putting up with the things that aren't working for you. And you can make changes for your own life that signal to the place you leave, like, I was really good. You're missing out. You didn't make the changes you need to make. You can take that or leave that. I don't care. What you choose to do with your people and your company is up to you. But what I do with my life and where I spend my time is up to me.
Yeah. No, I agree. What I did, I always look for things that I'd love to do, even if it wasn't within my job description, and somehow would, sell the idea of me doing that initiative. So that I think that's a way to look at it. Focus on the things in your job that you really like and try to, get rid of, or like you said, say no to other things. And there's no great time for vacations or, personal development, professional development, but, taking courses that you're interested in, and getting those on a calendar, I think can also help you kind of, because it's constant meetings. You can't do deep work when you're going from meeting to meeting to meeting. There's no, you can't create strategies and think of innovative ideas to make more money, save money, make the
Right.
culture better. So I think that's important.
Yeah. The only thing I would say is make sure that you don't make what's external to you the thing that helps you make it through something, right? Because if you're somebody who likes to learn, you can kind of get caught in the loop of endlessly learning without necessarily
Oh yeah,
implementing or
yeah.
taking it. And even if you are, like, I love the idea of indulging in things that you love and taking courses around those and doing that. I think that's really important. I think it's equally important to take the time to sit with how you got to where you are so that you can do those things without feeling the guilt. I should be spending my time on my laptop. Instead, I'm trying to take this course because I'm personally interested. You know, your mind is going to come up with all these things when you try to shift your paradigm. And it's important to listen to it so that you know what needs to change. And I think to do things in parallel, because unfortunately, what I have definitely discovered is that deep self, the inner work that a lot of people need to do. The majority of people are never going to do it, right? And that's okay. You know, there's no judgment there. We're all here on our own journeys. But if there's things that we're talking about here that resonate with those who are listening, if you set aside time to think for 30 minutes or to reflect on your day, you got to treat it as just as sacred as if it's a 30-minute time slot on your calendar that somebody else put there, right? Like honoring yourself as a priority, very uncomfortable at first, absolutely necessary. And so experimenting with some of those things and taking the baby steps is super necessary.
Maki, what's your advice for somebody in terms of, how do they balance? You have to have, some people have ambition, so that's not a bad thing. How do you balance the ambition with the awareness part of it?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. My ambition didn't go anywhere, right? Like that's always been intact. But I think what having all the self-awareness that I do now that I didn't before has done for me is made it really clear where to channel that ambition, right? I know what, like to your point, I know what I like. I know what energizes me. I know where I feel purposeful. I know where I can make an impact. And I can channel that energy unapologetically because I know exactly why it matters. And it isn't someone else's agenda. It's my agenda. There's absolutely nothing wrong with ambition. You should embrace it. You should also embrace doing it in a way that feels very authentic and aligned to you so that you don't end up in a place where you've achieved a lot and you have a lot to show for it, but you don't necessarily feel it internally as a very aligned place to be.
Yeah. You mentioned it when we first started the conversation that, when you were at Cerner, now Oracle, success looked different than it does now, being a strategy advisor, fractional C-suite executive and executive coach. So what is your, what is success for you now?
Yeah, success for me now, definitely different. First of all, I'm just really lucky. I get to work with really incredible people. And so it's kind of like getting to choose my collaborators because I see the people that I'm working with in coaching and advising as collaborators, right? I'm collaborating with them to get to a place that they want to be at. And I get to decide who those people are, which is, amazing. And I'm so grateful for that. It's not like being in an organization where I've got to go in and I've got to, deal with whoever's around me. I get to decide like, yeah, this person would be wonderful to work with. And if they agree, we work together and it's great. So there's that piece of it. There's also the piece that is, one of the things that always used to really get me into trouble was being a truth teller. And, people don't like that. I think that's still a thing in our society that it's hard to be a truth teller.
Yeah.
It got me into trouble a lot when I was in corporate, despite my success. And I'm getting to work in a space where that's part of my job is to be that truth teller. That's what people are coming to me for. And so that alignment with the things that are true to me is such a huge part of the difference between where I was before and where I am now. I felt like before, in order to have the success that I had to withhold pieces of myself that were authentic to me because they weren't well received. And now I'm able to work directly from those energies. And that's why people are coming to me. And that is just such a different feeling in terms of what it means to create success in this way, because it's an alignment. I don't have to eat my words. I don't have to not say the thing. And there's a bond that you can build with the people who are coming to you for that just isn't present when you feel like you can't really be who you are.
Yeah. I don't know if you can sum it to one question, but if people are contemplating, asking themselves before they take the next career change or they just got riff, what one question would you say you need to ask yourself this?
The one question I tell everyone to ask, no matter where you are in life, is what are you tolerating? What are you tolerating? And be willing to look at the answer. And this isn't just people and situations and circumstances. It's inside your head, your emotional state, your physical state. In general, what are you putting up with that isn't serving you? Be willing to look at that in black and white and be willing to take the action that you need to take in order to start making those changes. But first, just that truth of building the self-awareness to the point where you can unsee it is the most important thing. So ask yourself what you're tolerating and then be real about the answer.
Maki, thanks so much for coming back to the corporate couch. And I love the conversation. I always feel smarter after talking to you. So thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Jeff. It was great. Thanks so much for having me back.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Corporate Couch. If you enjoy the podcast, I would love for you to take 2 minutes out of your day to rate us 5 stars and write a review. Please join me next week to learn from another great leader sharing their professional journey and insights.